All right, the first thing you're going to start with are the lowest components, and those are the resistors and the switches in that order. So one of the things that I recommend doing, there's a couple tips on this. First of all, make sure you double check your resistance. In this case, when I was pulling them out, I marked the 4K7 resistors as well as the 1K, but these I'm going to have to double check. Now, some of you may be able to, your eyes aren't as old as mine, and you can actually look at the, what's going on in the resistor itself. But I really can't discern what those colors are, other than maybe the dark ones and the lighter ones. So I always use a multimeter to double check. Then what you're gonna do is you're simply going to take your resistors and feed them through the board based on the resistance value for each one. So I'll show that here in a second. So I've got my multimeter turned on, and I've got it set to the ohms reading here. You can see the little ohm sign. That's how you know. So the first thing I'm going to do is check my 4K7s just to make sure. It doesn't matter which side you check, but you check them by touching the end. So there you go. It's 4.6 K ohm. If you can see that on the reading, that means 4,700 or 4,600 ohms. So these are correct. So now I'm going to go ahead and do those first. Now these other ones, this one I believe is a 1K. And you got to hold it there for a second and make sure you get a good connection on it. Yeah, so 0.982K, that's close enough. These aren't going to be perfect. There's a certain threshold they can be in. Okay, so now looking at the board, all the 4K7s go in these, there's 8 of them, and they go in these 8 slots here. And I recommend orienting them all the same way. You don't have to. Resistors do not have polarity, so it doesn't matter which way you orient them, but just for consistency purposes and how it looks, make them all the same way. I recommend the gold going down towards the bottom of the board. That's how they're shown on the video or on the website. So you probably want to put them all in at once. You don't have to. You can do one at a time, but I recommend just doing them all at once. So one way to do it, the way that I like to do, is kind of bend it before you insert it in, and then just try to find the hole, and then just kind of tuck it in. Now try to get it as squared up as you can. There you go. So you want it looking just like that. And then the other side's going to be like that until we get around and trim it. Make sure I can zoom out on that. So here's the legs. They're kind of just hanging there, and that's fine. So you can either, don't cut the legs yet. So you want to just insert all these in, and then you're going to solder them and then cut the leg. And to help keep them from moving around while you're inserting them, you can crisscross the legs, kind of like I've done here. That'll help hold them in place so they don't pop out. All right, so I've got the first batch of 4 of the 4K7s installed on the board, and I've got the legs that are still loose, as you can see here. So now I'm going to go ahead and solder these, and then I'll do the next set of 4. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is turn on your soldering iron, get your solder out, and then you're just going to take your iron. I always clean mine, dip it in the wool before I go, and then you simply hold the iron here and then just put a little bit of solder on there. Only touch it for maybe a few seconds, a couple seconds max. You don't need it very long. Let me show how that one looks. So basically what you want, hopefully you can see this okay on the camera, you want it to just be a little mini volcano. You don't want it to look dull, you want it to look shiny. You can kind of see there how those are done. So they should all look basically like that. No more than a few seconds, and just lightly touch it. Okay, I've got all mine in. You just want to see a little bit on this side of the board. Just barely kind of see the tin there. All right, and then the other thing you want to double check is that, does everything still look good? Did nothing fall out, come loose? If it did, you can simply heat the side and then push it with your finger. That's one way to adjust it. So you should be able to loosen these up. Hopefully you've got a pair of these. You can also use heavy-duty scissors and you're just going to go through here and trim the ends off. And once you do this, there's really no going back. So, again, you might want to just double check that you have everything correct in terms of the resistance, that you're using the right resistor before you solder them on, like I showed earlier. All right, now we're just going to repeat that for these next 4. And flip it over, crisscross the legs. Just repeat until all 4 are in there. Alright, I've got the next 4 that are installed. Got the legs crisscrossed. Now I'm going to flip it over and do the soldering just like I did before. Alright, once again, inspect your soldering joints. Make sure they all look about like this, little mini volcanoes on there. If you see any that are too low, actually, now go ahead and snip again. Watch out, these can eject as well. And try to get them as close to the board as you can, because you don't want to feel those. But you also don't want to cut your little soldering joints off either. So that's about the right length you want them. Okay, the next we're going to do the next resistors, and there are 5 of them, and you can see right here the values are silkscreened on the board just like they were for the 4K7. So you want to just follow that. So the 1K resistor goes here, 100 ohm resistor here, the 10K here, another 10K, and then another 10K. So I'm just repeating the same process. I took my 1K resistor and I'm putting it in the bank. Doesn't really matter, again, which way it goes in, as long as it goes in and it fits. And just crisscross the legs to hold it in. And you really just want to repeat that for all these resistors here. We're also going to there's a couple 10Ks up here that we have to get to as well. Okay, in case you weren't sure on the convention, 100R is 100 ohm. So that's the next one that goes in. And the next 3 are all 10Ks, and I went ahead and I checked all my resistors. You can kind of see them here sitting on the side. So these are all 10K resistors, and that's pretty much, so we're going to do these 3, and then we're going to do these 2 up here. And that should be it for the resistors. Okay, so I put in the next 3 10K resistors, all in the same orientation. So I've got, in my case, the thicker red stripe is at the bottom. And then I'm just going to do the same thing up here for these 2 10Ks. Okay, all the resistors are installed. Now I'm going to flip it over and finish soldering. Alright, so after soldering, once again, inspect your joints. If you see any dull soldering joints, then that means you have a cold joint and you're probably not keeping the iron on the board quite as long, or your iron's not hot enough. I run mine at about 300 degrees Celsius, which I find works great for what I need to do. In some cases, you might have a soldering iron that the temperature isn't accurate, so that can happen too. You don't want to run too hot either, because you can actually lift the pads off. So you got to find that happy spot. All right, now we're just going to trim up these leads. All right, so here's what your board should look like when all the resistors are soldered in.